Okay, so uh, I'm Cooper McCabe. Obviously, I'm in y'all's class. I'm writing my paper, my final paper on immigration and its impact on globalization, as well as globalization pushing immigration as a mode of globalization. And I'm comparing Juan Ramon Jiménez and his specific poem "Oceans," as well as Patrick Rosal and his few of his poems from Brooklyn Antediluvian. For those of you who don't know or haven't read any of Jimenez's work, he's a Spanish poet, and right around the outbreak of the Franco Revolution, the Spanish Civil War in 1939, he moved to Puerto Rico and was exiled in Puerto Rico and the United States. He taught a little bit in Miami and also in Maryland at the University of Miami at Coral Gables and at the University of Maryland. Patrick Rosal, I'm sure all of you know, is son of Filipino immigrants. They moved to the borough of Brooklyn in New York, and that's where Patrick grew up. And a lot of his writing stems from his experiences growing up and who he's become growing up in that borough, which is full of immigrants from all over the world, not just Philippines or Europe, but literally everywhere. My thesis statement for this is pretty simple, but it's got a lot behind it. It is immigration is a product of globalization as well as a mode of globalization. And I wrote my first essay about oceans. I did a critical reading of Oceans by Juan Ramon Jiménez, and I focused on how it could be read as a tale of immigration. And I decided to kind of expand on that with this paper and do a little bit of research on not just immigration, but potential drivers of immigration, such as Globalization and Human Well-Being by Mukherjee and Krikhouse, I believe, are the two authors of that journal article. And then Globalization and Inequality by Marissa Mills. I also used Multitude Against an Empire, which was the Negri and Hardt reading that we had to do earlier this year. I'm using Globalization and Literature by Gupta, and Science Fiction and Globalization, and that is by, one second, that's by David M. Higgins. Still kind of working on how to use that one. I've read it about 1,000 times, and it's definitely got some potential uses. He draws a lot from Gupta's Globalization and Literature, but I see some potential uses. I'm just not entirely sure how I'm going to fit it in exactly. But basically, what I want to talk about in this presentation, talk about my paper, is how immigration is a mode of globalization as well as a product of globalization. So to get started, I'm going to talk about the Multitude Against an Empire. And I talk about Multitude Against an Empire quite a bit in my first essay. I talk about how the mobility of commodities, especially the commodity that a lot of people overlook, which is labor power, how those drive immigration. So, for instance, we see a lot of movement of specific commodities, whether it be oil and gas, or well, I guess not necessarily the movement of oil and gas, but movement of people going to oil and gas. That commodity of labor force is moving people from, specific example, from Mexico into southern United States, especially Permian Basin area, going to find jobs in the oil field. Or if you want to look at it from an outsourcing standpoint, you see a lot of people taking jobs at would cost a little bit more in America, they send them off overseas to the Philippines, to Southeast Asia, and you see a lot of this labor force being utilized in different areas of the world instead of on the home turf where the product is actually being produced. Also, you kind of see with that, you see, as Gupta mentioned, from he actually uses one of the people in his book. It's Saskia Sassen. She points out that there's a profit maximizing strategy used by big corporations to get everything out of the incoming labor that they have. Talking about a profit maximizing strategy that can operate through subcontracting, use of sweatshops and homework, or direct acquisition of goods and services, and that can pertain directly to the immigrant, the individual themselves, and the commodities, not just labor force, but also commodities that are being produced right there on your front doorstep. A force and a major driving force of immigration has a lot to do with well-being as a product of globalization. So, how globalization and well-being are connected, there's a connection to immigration. People are always going to want to have a better life for themselves, their families, their friends, the people around them, co-workers, whatever it may be. They're always going to be striving to make everything better. So, in Globalization and Well-Being by Mukherjee and Krikhaus, they make a point that well-being and I guess the pursuit of well-being is pertinent to long-run economic development, which you can also see with immigration. Immigration is big time for long-term economic development. You have people that are coming in who are willing to work jobs that not very many people who already live in these areas want to do, and they're willing to do it for cheap. Not only that, you're also talking about the immigrants of a higher education standpoint. Somebody may be a refugee from the Middle East or Africa or somewhere like that who does have higher education or is in pursuit of higher education, and they're staying in the places where they're coming to get that higher education, whether it be Europe, North America, some Western, I don't want to say first world, but more economically developed centers. So you're going to have these guys also contributing to your long-term economic growth. In Globalization and Inequality by Mills, she discusses how globalization has melted international borders and has lifted millions of people out of poverty. That's a kind of a big thing to touch on, not only because has globalization built a completely new world order, such as, like I said earlier, outsourcing. You're taking tons of jobs and putting them into places where it's not necessarily more expensive. It's definitely cheaper, but you're also giving these people who wouldn't necessarily have work in these areas, and you're also seeing people, like immigration-wise, people who are immigrating to these new areas with a lot more ease, whether it be illegally or even legally. And I understand that the legal immigration scene in America is not exactly the easiest one to to be in or to be a part of. It's very hard to gain your citizenship as an American. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort. And globalization is essentially making that process a lot easier by default, because you're having more people, like the multitude, who are coming into the United States, and you can't take all of them out. you're going to have to grant some of these people their citizenship, or at least of a working visa. That way that they can not only contribute to your economy, but they can also contribute to the well-being of their lives. And it's just, inequality itself is something that pushes globalization and pushes immigration forward. So with Rosal and Jiménez, I'm reading these guys' poems as tales of immigration. So, for instance, Oceans I see as the beginning of an immigrant's story. So they're washing up onto their new land, this place that they're coming to immigrate on, whether they be legal or illegal immigrants. They are starting a new life. Whereas Rosal, I'm reading it more as a tale of immigration that worked out. Somebody whose parents have come to America, gotten a foothold in America, and been able to better themselves and better the lives of their family through immigration. So it's pretty much what you guys need to look for whenever you're reading my essay. I appreciate the feedback. Just good luck on y'all's essays, and thanks for paying attention to mine for a little bit. Thanks.